Hello, everyone. This week, we're going to start talking about the digestive system of the human body, and its function is to break down food into smaller particles. Particles so small that they would actually dissolve in your blood and be able to be taken around the body and into every cell for use as an energy source or to build other molecules with. Um, there's two types of digestion. One is called mechanical, which is basically chewing. Mechanical digestion is just breaking the food apart, using mechanical means, some kind of energy that just breaks it up. Whereas chemical digestion uses something called enzymes. And enzymes are proteins that actually cause the food to break down into much smaller particles very efficiently. The three types of foods that we eat mostly are carbohydrates, proteins, and triglycerides, which are fats and oils. For digesting starch, for example, carbohydrate, uh, starch is many, many glucose molecules, thousands of them, joined together in big, long chain by strong chemical bonds. And when you put starch in your mouth, you can't taste it because the taste buds in your mouth, they can't fit in there. The molecule of starch is too big. So starch basically has very little flavor. So what you do is you have an enzyme in your saliva. The enzyme in your saliva is called amylase. And amylase is short for the enzyme name. Amylose is the name of starch, and ASE is the ending for all enzymes. So amylase is the enzyme that digests starch. And what it does is it breaks the starch up into two glucose units. It breaks every other bond in the long chain of glucose molecules. So you end up with glucose, 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 many of them. And as you know, that's a disaccharide. And the disaccharide glucose and glucose is actually called maltose. Now, the food in your, the maltose in your mouth and starch in your mouth, it's not going to be there long enough to finish that job. So you'll swallow a lot of starch still. But you'll start the process in your mouth with the salivary amylase enzyme. And then when it gets into your stomach, it doesn't do much there. And then it gets down into your small intestine. In your small intestine, you have enzymes called maltase. It's a disaccharide ACE, an enzyme that breaks down a disaccharide, glucose units. And what it does, it breaks the bond between the two glucoses, maltase. And that will end up with glucose, and glucose is small enough to get across the wall of your intestines and into your bloodstream, which will take it around your body to every single cell, and you use it for energy or storage if you need to store the food. Glucose can be stored in your liver as glycogen, another long polysaccharide, and then you can break it down as you need it if you don't use all the glucose you eat right away. The proteins are made of amino acids joined together, again, long chains. And you don't really digest them chemically in your mouth. You basically just chew them there. And you swallow the proteins. When it gets into your stomach, the proteins react with an enzyme called pepsin. It's one of the few enzymes that do not end in ASE. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down proteins into smaller protein units. In other words, instead of breaking every bond between the amino acids in the chains, it just breaks a bond here and there. So you get smaller protein units. They're called polypeptides. And when that ends up leaving your stomach and goes into your small intestine, you have an enzyme called trypsin. And what trypsin can do, it comes from your pancreas. What it can do is it can break down the proteins into amino acids, the actual units that the proteins are made of. And then those amino acids can go into your bloodstream, be taken around your body get to every cell, and to be used as energy or to be used to build more proteins from in your body. And when we get to the fats, the triglycerides and fats and oils, you don't do much with them in your mouth other than taste them. And then you swallow them into your stomach and then into your small intestine. When you get them into the small intestine, it mixes with a substance called bile, which comes from your liver. And what the bile does is it has a chemical in it that's a detergent and actually dissolves the fat for you in your small intestine, just kind of like the detergents dissolve the grease off your clothes in the washing machine. And what happens then is that the dissolved fat molecules can be easily broken down by the enzyme also coming from your pancreas called lipase. And lipase comes from the word lipid. because that's what a fat is, and it goes into your small intestine and breaks the fat down into fatty acids and glycerol, and that's taken around your body, mostly in the lymphatic system, which is another circulatory system you have besides your bloodstream, so that a lot of the fatty materials don't clog up your bloodstream. And it gets taken to every cell, and again, they can be used for building blocks for different things or for energy. So that's how we digest the three types of foods we eat. Now, in this slide here, it's just showing you what the organs of the digestive system really are. The alimentary canal is the tube through which the food must travel from one end of your, from your mouth to your anus, basically. And it consists of your mouth, your throat. Your esophagus is the tube that leads down to your stomach, the stomach itself, and then it goes into the small intestine, and then finally into the large intestine. And as it goes through, the food, the goodies in the food, the good stuff, is absorbed into your bloodstream, and the stuff you can't digest, you just eliminate. The accessory organs are organs in your digestive system that help out. The liver, for example, makes that bile that is poured into your small intestine to help dissolve the fats. The gallbladder stores the bile behind the liver, so it's not put into your small intestine all the time. It's just squeezed into there by the gallbladder when there's something to work on, when the stomach empties. So the bile isn't poured into your small intestine all the time. That would be wasteful. And then your pancreas, very, very important. It makes all three digestive enzymes: pancreatic amylase to finish the digestion of starch, pancreatic the trypsin to finish the digestion of proteins, and pancreatic lipase, which finishes the digestion of fats. So if something happens to your pancreas, your digestive system is really in big trouble. Now the next slide will show you a little diagram of the actual system. And you can see the alimentary canal is basically, the mouth, and then it goes through the tube of the esophagus and into your stomach, and then your small intestine and large intestine, and finally outside your body for the parts that you can't digest. This is the liver, and that's the gallbladder right there that stores the bile for you, that squeezes into your small intestine when needed. And then, of course, your pancreas is right here under your stomach, and that one is very important because it makes the digestive enzymes. Then we get to the next slide. And that one we'll start talking about the mouth. The mouth obviously has a lot to do with digestion. The lips, the cheeks, the two palates, hard in the front, soft in the back. That's the roof of your mouth. And the uvula is that little fleshy thing that hangs down behind your throat that helps the food from falling into your throat too soon, and like blocks it when you don't want to really swallow it yet. And then you have your mouth, and the tongue has the function of tasting the food. And of course, there's four basic tastes: salt, sweet, bitter, and sour. A fifth one called umami is coming up now as a possibility also, and that one is a sort of a savory flavor, the flavor of meat. Different parts of your tongue taste different flavors. Your tongue also helps to move the food back of your mouth as you chew it, and then finally the mushy chewed food will actually touch certain cells in the back of your throat, which will automatically cause your brain to make you swallow. You can't swallow if there's nothing to swallow. Right now you probably can swallow because there's saliva in your mouth, but if you tried to swallow 5 or 6 times in a row, and after your mouth gets kind of dry and empty, your brain will say, "What are you doing? There's nothing there." So it'll stop you from swallowing. The chewing is the mechanical digestion we talked about, and that starts breaking down the food, obviously, into smaller particles, so that's important. You have in your mouth also your salivary glands. Salivary glands are found under your ear and underneath your tongue. And what they do, they produce a good amount of saliva, about 1 liter a day. It contains mostly water, mucus, which makes it sort of slippery. Amylase, the enzyme that begins the digestion of starch into maltose, and lysozyme, which is an enzyme that actually a protein that actually is an antibiotic, so it kind of helps to kill some bacteria in your food, because your food isn't, even though you cook it, is still not sterile. When you push the food near the back of your throat, it touches certain cells in the back, and that causes your body to swallow. And when you swallow, the top of your trachea has a little flap on it. It's called the epiglottis. And what happens is that when you swallow, the epiglottis closes the top of the trachea. So the food that you're trying to swallow doesn't go down into your lungs. Instead is forced into the other tube, the correct one, the esophagus, so that it goes properly down into your stomach where it's supposed to go. So we go to the next slide now. And it just tells you a little bit about the esophagus. The esophagus runs from your pharynx, which is your throat, down to your stomach, right through your diaphragm. There's a process called peristalsis. Peristalsis is smooth muscle squeezing. The smooth muscles, remember, are involuntary muscles that your brain controls, but you don't consciously control it. And what it does, it squeezes the food little by little as it goes down the esophagus and into your stomach. That's called peristalsis. The esophagus is basically a passageway for food only. It does not really digest anything. And it goes down into your stomach. Now, this is what the esophagus kind of looks like. It's just a quick look. It's lined in epithelium like all tubes are. Remember, epithelium is covered in lining tissue. And then it has a couple of layers of smooth muscle. Those are the muscles that actually squeeze and let the food move through. That's the peristalsis, the involuntary squeezing. And then you have some connective tissue in there to give it some strength so it doesn't break or pop on you when you don't want it to. And then we have a picture here of the esophagus going down into the stomach. Now, once the food squeezes down through the esophagus by peristalsis, it has to go through a little valve called the cardiac sphincter. And then it enters the stomach. That cardiac sphincter is very, very important because when it's closed and the food is in the stomach has very powerful smooth muscles. If you ever threw up, you know what I mean. And so when the stomach churns and mixes with the food and all the things, that digestive juices in the stomach, which contain acid, the cardiac sphincter prevents that from popping back up into your esophagus and causing it to burn. That used to be called heartburn, but now it's called acid reflux or GERD. And it could be very painful, and it could also cause damages to your esophagus, like esophagus ulcers and maybe even esophageal cancer. So you got to be a little careful of that one, and it's very painful. But as long as that cardiac sphincter closes the way it's supposed to, and everything's working right, the acid in your stomach will not pop up into your esophagus when the stomach is working. Now, the stomach is a bag. It's kind of big fat on one end and skinny on the other end, and it's all folded on the inside. The folds are there so the stomach can expand. They're called rugae, the little folds. And when the stomach gets the food, the lining of the stomach actually creates what they call gastric juice. And gastric juice is made of mostly water and enzymes and mucus. And the gastric juice mixes with the food, and one of the enzymes in there is pepsin, and it breaks the proteins down. Your stomach is basically a protein digesting bag. It breaks big protein molecules down into smaller protein molecules called little polypeptides. Doesn't finish the job, doesn't turn the proteins into amino acids yet, but it just breaks them up here and there. The food can stay in your stomach for a number of hours, and it'll keep churning and mixing with the gastric juice. And then when it's done, the stomach will squeeze a small amount of the material that's in your stomach into your small intestine through another sphincter muscle called the pyloric sphincter. The smaller part of your stomach, the thinner part, is called the pylorus. And what that happens is it goes into your small intestine. Now, the first part of the small intestine that receives these little squirts of food as it comes out of the stomach is called the duodenum. The duodenum is very important because it's connected directly to the pancreas and the liver. And if you look at the liver up top there, which is basically folded up so you can see it better, you can see underneath the liver is the gallbladder. And the gallbladder will store that bile, that brownish greenish fluid that the stomach makes, which contains the detergent that's going to not digest but dissolve the fats. And when the bile goes through that little bile duct and leads into the small intestine, it mixes with the food there and dissolves the fats for you. It only goes in there when the stomach is emptying. So everything is kind of timed so you don't waste the bile. And then you have the pancreas. Now the pancreas has a pancreatic duct that leads into the small intestine, the duodenum first. That's the first 6 inches of your small intestine. And that takes all three digestive enzymes to finish the job of digesting the food. It contains digestive trypsin, pancreatic trypsin, to finish the digestion of those little protein molecules that are made by the stomach into amino acids, which are, the actual units that proteins are made of. It contains the pancreatic amylase to finish the job of turning the starch into maltose. And then it contains the lipase to finish at least start the digestion anyway of fats into fatty acids and glycerol. So that's the first part of your small intestine. The first part of your small intestine is duodenum, very important part. And then we get to the next slide here. And the next slide shows you a better little picture of the stomach. You can see it has very, at least 3 layers of smooth muscles, all in various different patterns, very strong. So it mixes the food. You can see the rugae is all those folds inside so that the stomach can expand when you eat your Thanksgiving dinner. Now, the gastric juice is made by the stomach lining, and it's made of water mostly. Pepsin, the enzyme, a lot of mucus. Now, the mucus is there because the enzyme pepsin digests proteins. And remember, all these muscles and stomach linings and stuff contain lots of protein. So you don't want the stomach to digest itself. So the mucus creates a lining that protects the stomach from its own digestive juices. It lines the stomach inside. HCl is hydrochloric acid. Now, the hydrochloric acid is there because when the stomach makes the pepsin enzyme, it makes it in an inactive form. So it doesn't, the pepsin doesn't damage the cells that actually make it. And then that inactive pepsin is put into the stomach and mixed with the acid. When it's mixed with the acid, then it becomes active pepsin. So it's only active pepsin when it mixes with the acid inside the stomach, and therefore it doesn't really hurt the stomach lining cells that make it. The stomach can, the chyme is the food that's in the stomach. It breaks down, so basically vomit, and it takes hours to do the job. And then it empties into the small intestine a little bit at a time through that pyloric sphincter you see there. Now we get to the next slide here. This is the stomach itself, and you can see the stomach lining has many different kinds of cells, different cells that make the different things that is in the gastric juice. You have cells that actually make the pepsin in that inactive form, which is pepsinogen. And then you see that when it mixes with the acid, the HCl, hydrochloric acid, it becomes active pepsin inside the stomach. You have chief cells, gastric glands. The chief cells make the pepsinogen. The mucus cells make the mucus. Parietal cells make the acid. So all of that is mixed together to create the gastric juice that you make a good amount of, about a liter a day in there. To help digest your food, especially the proteins. Okay. Pepsin is an actively protein digestive enzyme. It doesn't break all the bonds, like I said. It just breaks bonds here and there to create smaller polypeptides. You also make a chemical in your stomach called renin, which helps digest your milk proteins for you. The only absorption that occurs through the walls of the stomach into your bloodstream is of alcohol and pepsin. That's why if you have an empty stomach, alcohol and aspirin, I mean, if you have an empty stomach and you drink alcohol, it goes right through into your bloodstream right away and has an effect on you quickly. And aspirin can do the same thing. And if you have too much aspirin here and there in your body because you keep taking it too much, you could actually cause damage to your stomach lining and even ulcers. Now, the small intestine. Here's the duodenum again, that first 6 inches of the small intestine. And in this diagram, you could actually see the gallbladder, which is behind the liver, squeezing the bile into the small intestine to help digest or actually dissolve the fats. And then you have the pancreas, which is going to put the pancreatic juice in there too to finish the job of the digestion, the 3 different enzymes it has, amylase, trypsin, and lipase. Okay, now in the pancreas, the pancreas makes this stuff called pancreatic juice. And again, it contains lots of water. Very important here, it has a strong base in it. Remember, the pancreatic juice is emptying into the duodenum, into your small intestine. You want to basin that because that strong acid in the stomach, you do not want it to maintain its acidity in the small intestine because it will damage the small intestine. So the pancreatic juice, when it goes into the duodenum from the pancreas, is actually going to neutralize a lot of that stomach acid. The pancreatic amylase will finish the digestion of starch into maltose. The trypsin will finish the digestion of proteins into amino acids. And the lipase in there will digest the triglycerides or fats and oils into glycerols and fatty acids. And then we said the liver itself, it makes that bile. It's a brownish color stored in the gallbladder. It empties into the duodenum through that bile duct and contains the also contains the breakdown products of your dead red blood cells. That's why it's brownish color. And that stains everything in your small intestine down brownish, which is why your poop is basically brown. It contains the products of your dead red blood cells that your liver got rid of for you. And of course, the detergent to dissolve the fats and oils. Now, this is your intestines, your small intestine, large intestine. You can see that the jejunum is the longest part of the small intestine. It can be many, many feet long. It's connected to the duodenum on the top. And then it ends up into a small area at the bottom there called the ileum. So you have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, which are the three parts of your small intestine. Your small intestine's job is to finish the digestion. So it mixes with those enzymes from the pancreas and turns all your little polypeptide proteins into amino acids, which go into your bloodstream in the small intestine and then around your body. It turns all of that starch that's left over into maltose and then also into glucose because it has the enzyme maltase as well. And it turns that, puts that glucose in your blood so it'll go around your body for you. And the starches, the fats and oils will go into the lymphatic circulatory system. You have another circulatory system. It's a clear fluid that goes around your body, but not in the bloodstream. And what it does is it takes the products of fat digestion, fatty acids and glycerol around your body, and sometimes that actually reforms into fat inside your body as well. And it can be used for energy, or it can be used to build other molecules. All right, the ileum portion actually empties the small intestine into the large intestine. Now, in the small intestine, the inside is all folded up, and even the folds have folds. And the folds in the small intestine are called villi. And what that's for is to increase the surface area of your small intestine. If you took the 20-odd feet of your small intestine and stretched it out flat and took all the folds to make them straight and flat, the square footage would be equal to about, both sides of an actual tennis court. It's very, very, there's a lot of surface area there for absorption of the food into your bloodstream. The villi are like finger-like little structures or folds that formed, by the epithelium cells that line the small intestine. And even the villi have smaller folds. So they are incredibly amount of surface area there for absorption into your body after the digestion process is done. So those small molecules like amino acids and glucose and things can get into your bloodstream fairly easily. Now, in the villi, those folds in your small intestine. In fact, if you stuck your finger in your small intestine, which is not a good idea, but if you did that, it would feel almost like a soft brush. There'll be so many folds in there. But in the villi, there's blood vessels that absorb the glucose and amino acids and takes them around the body for you. There's also a lacteal. Lacteal is a portion of the lymphatic system, another circulatory system you have that takes a clear salty fluid around your body. And that one picks up most of the fatty acids and glycerol to be transported around your body. Now, what are the enzymes that are in your small intestine? Well, remember, the small intestine receives maltose from the mouth, and then once the small intestine, the enzymes from the pancreas the amylase, breaks down the rest of the starch in your small intestine. It's all becoming maltose. Maltose is a disaccharide. It's too big to get into your bloodstream. So you have to have in your small intestine another enzyme called maltase. And that's a disaccharide ACE. It's an enzyme that breaks down the disaccharide, the double sugar, maltose, glucose and glucose, into just glucose, and then it finishes the job and the glucose can get into your bloodstream. Also, the small intestine will finish the job of protein digestion with with trypsin that's coming from the pancreas. Remember that pancreas, again, plays a major role in digestion. A lot of people don't realize that. They think of the pancreas as making insulin all the time. But it does help you, actually, not only help, but allows you to digest your food. And it also has that base that neutralizes the stomach acid so you don't dissolve your small intestine eventually from the acid in your stomach. And now the pancreatic enzymes that play the major role in digestive function, lipase, that's the one that digests the fats and for you and the oils, turns them into fatty acids and glycerol. But you also have nucleases. Remember, when you eat your food, you're eating the a portion of another living thing, and that all living things contain DNA and RNA. And DNA and RNA could also be digested in your small intestine. You have DNase, they call it DNase, is a nuclease acid that DNA breaks it down into its smaller units, and you can use those to make your DNA from. Replicate needed. So you're actually just sort of rearranging the DNA from other organisms into your DNA when you need to, and RNA as well. And remember, the enzyme, the pancreas also makes a basic material that neutralizes the acid in the chyme, this material, that vomiting material that's coming out of your stomach and getting into your small intestine. Now, a lot of the water. Now, remember. The saliva contained water, the bile contained water, the pancreatic juice contained water, the gastric juice in your stomach contained water. All that water comes out of your bloodstream. So what you got to do is you got to put a lot of that back. Otherwise, you'd have crazy diarrhea. And so what happens in your small intestine is a lot of that water, as this sort of sloshy material moves through your small intestine, is absorbed back into the bloodstream. And so by the end of the small intestine, the material is basically a lot thicker and drier. Not dry so much, but sort of muddy. And a lot of that water is put back into your bloodstream in your small intestine. The end products of digestion, like amino acids, glucose, fatty acids, glycerol, absorbed from the small intestine into the bloodstream or the lymphatic system by either active transport using energy to pump it in to the blood, or by diffusion, just letting it just flow in. Now, once the food leaves your small intestine, there's a blood vessel that leads to your liver. It's called a portal vein, and the portal vein takes all the materials from your that go into your bloodstream from your small intestine, and when it takes them all to the liver. If you have a lot of glucose involved in this, the liver will take some of that glucose and store it as glycogen, another polysaccharide, long chain of amino acid, a long chain of glucoses in your intestines for storage in case you need it later. It would also be could also break down some of the amino acids so that you can use them for energy, or even use them to make more proteins in your body. With. We get to the next one, peristalsis. That's the way the food moves in your small intestine. Same thing that happened in your esophagus. It's just a major means of moving the food. It just squeezes the food involuntarily. You have no control over that. The only control you have when you deal with this digestive system is basically chewing and swallowing it. Everything else is kind of automatic. It squeezes the food all the way through the many, many feet of your small intestine. And as it's moving along, the water is absorbing into your bloodstream. The molecules are being digested by those enzymes from the pancreas, and the amino acids and the glucoses and the fatty acids and glycerol are going through the walls of the small intestine into either the blood or the lymphatic system to be transported around your body. The leftovers that you can't digest just keeps going and finally ends up into your large intestine. Then we get to the next slide here. Your large intestine. Now, your large intestine is also known as your colon, and you can see that the small intestine empties into the large intestine at the ileum of the small intestine. There's a little valve there. Now, you notice that the large intestine here, if I can show you with my little pointer, right there, the large intestine has a sort of a dead end here. This tube here is where the small intestine is emptying into the large intestine, and this little dead end is called a cecum. And so the valve that opens the between the large intestine and the small intestine is known as the ileocecal valve. The ileum is the last few inches of the small intestine, and the cecum is the first part of the large intestine. At the end of the cecum is the appendix, and the appendix has basically no function in the human being, and sometimes it could even get infected and cause issues. And you might have to actually get it cut off. So what's coming in here? Now, what's coming in here is all the material that you could not digest, but it's still very watery. Even though the small intestine put back most of the water that was in all those juices that help you digest your food back into the bloodstream, there's still a lot left. So this is basically a watery sort of river coming in here. It's sort of a thick river. And brownish in color because of the bile that's in it, which contains the dead red blood cells, the products of dead red blood cells. And so what happens is it goes, this material goes up your small intestine, the ascending colon, goes across your body, and then down in the descending colon here, and makes a sort of an S shape, and they call that the sigmoid colon. And then you have your rectum and your anus. Now, what's happening as it moves along here is that the water, a lot of the water is being transported back into your bloodstream again. Not much is actually digested in your small intestine now. This is all waste. And the water, as it moves into your bloodstream across the walls of the large intestine, makes the material inside of it a lot thicker. And so by the time it gets over here, it's kind of muddy. And by the time it gets over here, it's kind of thicker mud. And then by the time it gets down here, it's getting more solid. And of course, what's left over here is what we call the feces, or the material that you could not digest, which is mostly things like cellulose and lignin and things like that that are in plants that you could not digest. You have no enzymes for. So the more plant material you eat, the more poop you'll make. And then right down here is where it'll be all stored and moving down. Now this is also moved by peristalsis. It's sort of a sluggish peristalsis, though, and it squeezes, and moves that material all the way down and stores it down here in the rectum. And that just keeps getting more and more in there as it just sort of collects it. And then the rectum actually will be stretched, and that'll send a message to your brain that says, you know what, let's empty this. And then you go to the bathroom and you do that through the anus here. So the major job of the large intestine is to remove most of the water from the waste. And of course, the longer that waste stays in there, the harder it's going to get, because it's going to keep removing the water from it, and that can be a constipation issue. And so what happens here is that, and also not only the water is being removed, but there's also lots and lots and lots of bacteria in here. And the bacteria are actually feeding upon the waste and releasing from it various chemicals that you do need and that you didn't get from yourself, mostly things like vitamins. So those bacteria in here are actually helpful. One of them is called E. coli, and they call it that because it's in the colon. And human E. coli is safe. Now, if you have E. coli from another organism in your food, like E. coli from a cow, that could be dangerous for you. So when they butcher a cow, they have to be very, very careful to not open up the large intestine so that the material in there can get into the meat, and that can cause the issues that you hear in the news about E. coli poisoning. But human E. coli is fine, and that's inside your large intestine now, along with many other different species of bacteria. And they're releasing vitamins like vitamin K, which helps you digest your blood, and lots of B vitamins as well. And so that's going to end up making the feces, and the feces will come out through the anus. Okay. Now, next slide just show you a little bit about your large intestine. You're not really digesting anything there. You have all that bacteria. They produce the vitamins for you. They reduce it from your food, vitamin K and B enzymes, and also the gases. Now, the gases are their waste. The bacteria actually make waste like all other organisms do, but their waste is mostly gas. And when that happens, the gas is, of course, accumulating in your large intestine, and we know sometimes it escapes, and it could be a little embarrassing. The smell as well is from the bacteria. It's not from you. Remember, the large intestine does reabsorb a lot of the water into your body, and also the vitamins back into your body that came from the bacteria. Whatever's left over is eliminated, as you know. And then the last slide here, we have how it moves with the sluggish peristalsis. Very slow but powerful movements that actually move the waste along inside the large intestine for you. You actually move the food in stages, like 3 or 4 times per day it's moving. It doesn't mean you poop 3 or 4 times a day. It just means the food is moving in your large intestine like that. You have 2 sphincter muscles on your anus to help to open up the anus to allow the feces to leave your body. And then you can, obviously finish the job and feel very happy about yourself once you're done. That's your digestive system for you. I hope you enjoyed that. And it's we're getting close to the end now. We only have 3 more to go. And we'll see what we can do with that. Next week, we're going to be talking about the kidneys. So watch this recording. Check out the pages into the survival guide, and do the questions that are online for your assignment for this week. Okay, and then we'll be all set. We're getting close to the end, and don't forget your term paper. Okay, see you next time.